Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we're basically handing you a shortcut to expertise. So instead of you wading through massive agricultural textbooks, we are diving deep. We're going right into the meticulous personal notes of an expert gardener named Ang, and we're looking at Notes on Gardening, Part 744, which focuses exclusively on one single, really fascinating species. Our mission here is super targeted. We're analyzing why Ang found this one specific plant so worthy of, intense admiration, but then ultimately declared it completely incompatible with their whole gardening philosophy and, well, their lifestyle. It's a deep dive into the very specific things that can turn something objectively beautiful into an impractical obligation.
And the plant in question is Tulbaghia violacea. Most people know it as society garlic. And like you said, this isn't just a discussion about, foliage and flowers. It's really a detailed case study. It's about that tension between pure objective beauty and the compromises you have to make for, well, sustained high-effort cultivation. Why would an expert dedicate so much time to analyzing a plant just to decide they can't live with it? That's the core tension we're extracting for you today.
That sounds like a universal challenge, really. Identifying something that's perfect in concept, but just impossible in practice.
So let's start at the very root of the problem then. Where does society garlic actually sit in the botanical family tree? And why does that lineage immediately raise a red flag for Ang?
Right, so Tulbaghia violacea belongs to a major group known as the Amaryllidaceae family. And this classification, like you said, it's critical because this family is home to some very, very familiar culinary staples. We're talking about onions or true garlic. It places the society garlic squarely in a lineage that Ang already approaches with, well, some serious prejudice. And we see that prejudice right away in the notes. Ang explicitly states this general existing dislike for cultivating anything from the Amaryllidaceae family. But, you have to ask, is that fair? Is Ang's conflict driven by real-world difficulty, or is it more of a perceived difficulty based on a few bad experiences?
It's definitely rooted in very specific, repeated real-world difficulty. And that defines the why here. Ang has a hard rule. Gardening has to follow a low-maintenance gardening style. And the Amaryllidaceae family, just generally speaking, tends to be pretty high maintenance in ways that directly conflict with that rule.
Tell us a bit more about that conflict. What is it specifically about this family that demands so much more effort from a gardener?
Well, most plants in this family, especially the ones related to alliums, they demand very precise conditions. They often need, for example, highly specific soil drainage. Sometimes you need specialized amendments just to prevent the bulb from rotting. And crucially, they can also require specific dormancy periods that you really need to monitor. Or they might be prone to pests that need regular intervention. So in Ang's experience, trying to grow these plants has always just led to failure because they completely contradict that core philosophy of, set it and forget it's gardening.
So society garlic comes into the picture already having to overcome this genetic reputation for being demanding. It's challenging Ang's whole dedication to efficiency right from the start. It's actually kind of interesting that Ang even bothered to analyze it this deeply, given the historical failure rate with the entire family.
And that's the fascinating metadata of these notes, right? Ang is clearly drawn to it, almost against their own better judgment.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because despite this whole historical incompatibility, Ang admits the blooming was still rather intriguing. So, the plant offered a pretty significant visual distraction from its difficult heritage. What specific aesthetic features caught Ang's eye?
The visual payoff is very distinct from, say, the strong culinary plants it's related to. The notes detail these really delicate features. The flowers are these clusters of delicate, star-shaped blossoms. It's not a bulky, overpowering bloom. It's more airy, intricate, and refined.
And the color, it sounds equally understated. Not just a standard purple, but something much softer.
Precisely. Ang describes the flowers as soft lilac, so a pale, gentle shade of purple. It's beautiful, it's ethereal, and it immediately draws the expert's aesthetic focus. It forces this, temporary suspension of judgment about its difficult classification.
But the notes immediately crash back down to earth. They shift from this lovely, soft description to the harsh reality of scale and volume. It wasn't enough to just admire one beautiful flower, was it? The source material points to a necessary, almost monumental aesthetic requirement.
And that is the second constraint that just fundamentally conflicts with Ang's style. To truly get the visual power that makes this species so admired in the gardening community, it has to be planted in clusters. We are talking about visual density here.
Okay, but why is density so crucial for this specific plant? Why can't a single well-placed one hold its own?
It comes down to proportion and contrast, really. because the individual blossoms are so delicate and the foliage is relatively fine, a single plant, or even a
Mm,
small grouping, it just looks thin, almost weedy. It doesn't command attention.
I see.
Eng realizes that the beauty of society garlic is conditional. It's an optical illusion that requires mass to actually work. To get that desired impact, you need planting in bulk. Ideally, Eng notes, in a large bed or field.
Wow. So Aang is functionally trading the philosophy of low maintenance for a requirement of high volume visual impact. That forces a dramatic expansion of effort, resources, and, space.
Absolutely. The required visual payoff is achieving that sense of abundance and lush foliage.
Yeah.
And the notes are explicit about this. A single, isolated plant simply does not achieve the desired effect.
Mm.
For you, the listener, this is a key insight into landscaping. Some plants just demand monumental scale to deliver their promised beauty. They're designed for fields, not for a single pot or a tiny little border.
So that means even if Aang managed to overcome the difficulty of the Amaryllidaceae family, the soil drainage, the dormancy, all of it, the plant still demands a commitment of acreage that's just incompatible with the rest of Aang's gardening practice. It's a double whammy of high effort and high volume. That moves us perfectly into the final constraint, the physical and environmental limitations. So what does this all mean when we combine this demand for clustering with the plant's physical traits and its environment?
Well, now we have to analyze the physical reality of the plant in Ang's specific location. The society garlic has a pretty modest height, ranging from, say, 30 to 60 centimeters. Now, that range is perfectly fine in a lot of temperate climates, but Ang's notes focus on a critical, localized problem: the intense, specific conditions of tropical weather.
And Aang's tropical environment naturally includes strong winds. But why does that specific height range make the society garlic so vulnerable?
It's a matter of structural stability combined with wind dynamics. See, the tropical systems don't just bring strong winds, they bring sudden, powerful gusts and intense soil saturation. So a plant that is only knee-high, between 30 and 60 centimeters, has three problems in that kind of climate. One, it is short enough to bear the full brunt of wind shear right near the ground. Two, that moderate height provides just enough leverage on its relatively shallow root system to cause easy uprooting or snapping when the soil is saturated.
Oh, wow.
And three, the leaves and stems themselves. They just aren't structurally rigid enough to sustain that kind of repeated, high-velocity buffeting.
So even if Aang went through the massive effort of creating that large bed or field, and even if they mastered the specific needs of the Amaryllidaceae family, the physical reality of living in a tropical area meant the entire enterprise was likely futile from the very start.
It's an analysis of inevitability, really. The source notes conclude that this relatively short stature would not allow it to survive the strong winds typical of tropical weather. It's simply too fragile for the location. It would need specific protection or a completely different climate.
Okay, so if we synthesize this for you, the listener, we see this perfect Venn diagram of incompatibility. We have a plant from a historically difficult family, Amaryllidaceae, which requires large-scale, high-effort cluster planting, and is then physically too vulnerable to even survive the common environmental conditions of Aang's home. It fails on three major criteria: historical experience, aesthetic requirement, and locational reality.
It's a disciplined verdict,
Mm.
and it's based on pure logic. The author spent the time admiring, analyzing, appreciating the plant's beauty, but the final conclusion, it remains unshakable. The species is definitely, and I'm quoting here, worth knowing and admiring, but not one to keep and cultivate myself. It's a testament to the fact that true expertise often lies not in what you can grow, but in what you wisely decide not to grow.
That final line is so resonant, that realization that objective beauty doesn't automatically translate into personal compatibility.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this single set of gardening notes illustrates a really crucial trade-off. We often pursue knowledge or hobbies because of their abstract beauty. The concept is alluring, But Aang shows us that moment of clarity where abstract admiration just hits a wall, the wall of specialized high-maintenance effort that's required for true cultivation. Aang really teaches us how to identify something beautiful that demands a specific expertise, a large resource commitment, and a protected environment, and then decide that the logical, sustainable choice is just to appreciate it remotely.
And that framework is incredibly valuable. How many things in your life, whether it's a specific skill set, a demanding hobby, or even a specialized area of study, are better appreciated from afar than brought into the high-effort constraints of your everyday schedule? Sometimes admitting something is too high maintenance or requires incompatible resources is the most practical choice you can make. But let's leave you with this final provocative thought, building specifically on the constraints Aang cited. The vulnerability to tropical wind and that non-negotiable need for massive clustering. If you know that the visual beauty you desire requires both monumental effort and a fight against the very nature of your environment, where do you draw the line? Where do you draw the line between what is a necessary challenge, something worthy of your maximum effort, and what is simply a futile effort when you're pursuing beauty or knowledge? Something to ponder until our next deep dive.